It is February 10, 2025, and I needed to follow up on the last podcast. We discussed the Rising 15 motion that was made at City Council on February 5, 2025, and we discussed it at some length, and the motion had an exhibit that was not included in the agenda packet that was online. The motion was there, but not Exhibit A. And the motion describes Exhibit A as the demographic and socioeconomic data that was used to identify or determine the Rising 15. So we don't know what the difference between 15 and 16 were and all the rest of that, but nonetheless, I went to City Council, or the City Clerk, the Council's clerk, and obtained a copy of Exhibit A, and it is a one-page document, and it lists the name of the neighborhood, the population of the neighborhood, the racial makeup of the neighborhood, and the median income. And that was it. There was no other socioeconomic or demographic data, just the racial makeup of the neighborhood and the median income, which was unfortunate, but it also seems to me that you can't really make government funding decisions based on race. And maybe they decided they didn't make the decision based on race, even though race is one of two criteria that they use. But they really need to take a look at that and whether that is appropriate. The problem with the Rising 15 motion is that it creates these two funds, the Rising 15 Railroad Fund and the Rising 15 Economic Development Fund. But the way the motion is written, it makes it sound like the proceeds from the sale of the trust, our annual cut of that, or disbursement of that, 10% is going to go into the Rising 15 Railroad Fund, and there's going to be $18 million going into the Economic Development Fund. And people think that, well, wait a minute, that money can only be used for existing infrastructure, so what's going on here? And it's really not very clear. If you go back and listen to what the vice mayor was saying at the meeting, and she did use the terms money swap a couple of times, but you know, she really confused things, because I think what she was saying is that they don't want to take railway money to fund these two new special funds. They want to take an equivalent amount of 10% of the railway trust money for the railroad fund, and the other 18 million, they want that to come from another part of the budget. See, now that we have this railway trust money, we're rich. We've got money that we can use for things that we've never used them before. We have money that we can use for reparations for our poorest neighborhoods. So that's really what is happening here. And it's going to be up to the city council whether they want to go for that or not. But at the very least, they need to reconcile what the vice mayor was saying with what the motion says. And of course, you always have to go with the written word rather than what somebody says at a meeting, even when it's recorded. So I thought it was important to follow up with that. And again, when the referendum passed, one of the first things we said is that, okay, well, in order to make good on your promise, you need to take whatever you were spending on infrastructure before the trust fund was created and use that as a floor, because that's the only way you can really say that you've increased spending on deferred maintenance. The mayor likes to say over and over that they've got $400 million in deferred maintenance costs that are on the books. I don't know where that number comes from or how they arrived at it, but that's the number they're using. And establish that floor. Well, this motion goes against it. Even the Cincinnati Futures Commission is suggesting that at some point down the road, we can reduce the amount of infrastructure spending that we were affording before the trust fund. We can drop that down and use that money for something else. So we all knew that was going to happen. It's motions like the Rising 15 motion that are going to make that happen. And we all saw that coming. So I'm going to go down to the meeting on Wednesday at the city council meeting and at least express some concerns that we have. I suggested they withdraw the motion, they start over, start from scratch, and come up with a better motion that doesn't confuse everybody about what they're really talking about doing. They're talking about eating into the budget for these Rising 15, dedicate money to these Rising 15, and they're using the influx of money from the trust, from the railroad trust, to justify that. And so the council, I guess, will have to vote on it. But I don't think that's the way to go. I think you can go back and spend money in these neighborhoods. They call them underserved, but are they underserved now, or are we saying they have been historically underserved? And so this is kind of a form of reparations that, because we don't know whether they have any problem with access to public services. They need to articulate that. And we don't really know what the requirements are in any of these neighborhoods that would be funded with these special funds. What are they going to use them for? So it's very confusing. The vice mayor didn't help with this motion and the conflicting statement that were made in city council. So they really need to just scrap this motion and start over. And I actually received, I did send that email, and I received a response today from Mark Jeffries, council member Jeffries, and he said that he is adamant that the Railway Trust Fund proceeds are only to be used on existing infrastructure. And he was also strong on the idea that we need to establish a floor and not go below that. So at least he's got that message. Hopefully other members of the city council have gotten that message. And if they want to set up these special funds for the Rising 15, that they get the money from somewhere else besides the Railway Trust Fund. So I'm going to go down to the meeting on Wednesday. I'm also going to the Board of Trustees for the Railway Trust. I'll be going to that meeting tomorrow. And my issue there is whether the board has any intention of taking into consideration the city's ability to spend all this money. When you look at the surpluses that they have had in the city budget for the last 3 years, it's like $80 million or something like that. Last year was $65 million. And a lot of that money comes out of the capital account. So if they can't spend the money that they've had in the capital account historically, how are they going to spend all this extra infrastructure money? They've got to either staff up or beef up their contracting office or something, because it's going to take an effort to spend all that money. And if they can't spend it, what happens to it? Well, that's kind of my issue that I want to bring up with the board, at least articulate it to the board. I may even write them a letter before tomorrow. But we'll see what happens. I'll report back on the disposition of those two issues later on.